But this is about as good a time as you will ever find to invest. You will be able to invest, hire people in the sector of the economy that has the highest rate of unemployment, the construction sector, rebuild the infrastructure and prepare for the 21st century. This seems to me a no-brainer. It is something we have not been able to do, right? And so when I confront these kinds of difficult problems, and you say to yourself, this is so obvious, this is so right, and we can't do it, I decide to call onto the stage Rahm Emanuel. So Rahm Emanuel and Randi Weingarten are going to come and explain to me why we're going to make this happen after all. So let's start with you, Rahm. I know that you don't need any convincing on this issue. Even before you were Rahm Emanuel, you wrote a book in which you talked about the importance of infrastructure.
That's hard to do, but the Republicans will outlaw it soon.
So tell me, how are we going to break this logjam, and how have you managed to break it in Chicago?
Before I start, well, first of all, thank you. Second of all, I want to say thank you to CGI for having this 2 years in a row, their conference here. I now see that the NATO conference was kind of practice to have the CGI conference there. And I also want to thank JB and MK Pritzker for doing paying for the web portal for early childhood education, so parents throughout the city have the opportunity to find valuable ratings on the early childhood education. Here's the way I look at it. We have a 21st century economy in the city of Chicago sitting on a 20th century foundation. That's not sustainable. We are both the transportation and broadband backbone of America. If it moves on roads, rail, or runways, Chicago's it. And one of our economic advantages is that people can get to and from work, from home to work, conveniently. They can get anywhere, market around the world or the country, directly from the city of Chicago. And we have a livable city, parks, schools. We have to continue to invest in that. Now, we've done different things. Community colleges, out of our 6, we're going to rebuild 2 new campuses. We made major cuts and reforms in the central office, and we're plowing that back into new facilities. Total new school at Malcolm X, which will be healthcare. Total new school at Olive Harvey in transportation, distribution, logistics. Similar thing in our mass transit system. Major reforms inside the central office. Our mass transit, our water system, we're going to replace 900 miles of water pipe. Everything that is 100 years or older. And we have a lot that's 100 years or older. 650 miles of sewer, 160,000 catch basins, 2 largest water filtration plants in the world, and 2,000 miles of road will be rebuilt. Half the roads in the city will be repaved in the next decade.
And how are you going to pay for this, Rob?
Well, each one is different. The first 2 were reforms. The other one, we're taking up the rates of our water that goes directly into an infrastructure account to pay for it. We're making changes at O'Hare, major modernization there. And Park District, similar thing, reforms of the central office, plowing it back into where residents and neighborhoods touch the Park District. And my view on this is, and that's one aspect. The other aspect of it is we created an infrastructure trust. I wanted a breakout strategy for the city that doesn't tie us to Washington or Springfield's dysfunction. I can't afford the city to be tied waiting for Washington to act. And I'll be real quick because I obviously want to give Randy time. The day we announced our initiative for infrastructure, we're going to, in the next 3 years, 30,000 people are going to go back to work rebuilding our roads, our bridges, our schools, our water system in the city of Chicago. The day we announced it, Washington passed the 9th extension of the highway bill from 2005 for 90 days. Who would ever tie themselves to that with no prospect that by November they're going to get a bill? And Springfield, they're grappling with their own fiscal issue. I cannot tie the city's economic vitality, its future, and its viability to that dysfunction. So we've taken what we can in our own hands and now building, putting people to work. We're hiring people, putting them to work, building a city, so when a company that creates jobs know I can get somebody from living in a neighborhood to work efficiently. They can get to an airport by mass transit, get on a flight, and go directly to whatever market they're trying to sell something. And I will have a modern 21st century community college system, and every child in the city of Chicago, by the time we're done in 4 years, will live within 10-minute walk from a Park District facility.
Randi, I'm going to ask you the Admiral Stockdale question. Why are you here?
She will be more fluent in the answer.
We don't think of you as being engaged in these issues. Explain what brought you to this place.
So Chicago is a great town, but seriously, what goes on outside the classroom has a huge influence on what goes on in the classroom. And as the mayor said, what we are seeing around the country, you know, lots of people talk about education as we have to do as much as we can do to ensure that kids get the new skills and knowledge they need to compete in the 21st century. But what's also true is that the economic issues that affect kids right now affect teachers and classrooms and education hugely. Education and the economy are totally, completely interrelated. And the same way as the mayor talked about the frustration of just advocating and advocating, we said, just like labor has throughout its lifetime, we have to be an engine of economic development. So how do we become a real engine of economic development in these times? And so what the labor movement has done, and CGI has been terrific because they have really been a catalyst to this, last year with the commitment we made about infrastructure, and this year in terms of all the work that we're doing, is that labor, and President Trump asked me to do this, and there's about 20 labor representatives sitting in this audience. We have a three-part approach to infrastructure. Number one is working with our pension trustees to encourage pension funds to invest in infrastructure projects, as long as those investments are prudent and fiduciarily sound. Number two, retrofitting and upgrading buildings to make them more energy efficient. And number three, providing training for current workers to upgrade their skills and for new workers to have the skills that they need and that America needs. So it's about how do we create jobs, how do we have skin in the game, how do we use the assets that we have to really move infrastructure products in a period of time of complete immobilization in Washington. And let me just say, last year we spent a lot of time at this forum with the president about the allocations for infrastructure that two of the big California funds have made. We committed that there'd be $10 billion in infrastructure investments through pension funds, and we said we had, by September, $1 billion that was already allocated. But this year, let me just give you a number. Now, Rahm remembers this by heart. My mind is not such, so let me just read this number. Since last year's CGI meeting, the AFL-CIO's Housing Investment Trust invested $165 million in energy efficiency retrofits of 6 multifamily housing projects, 2 of them in Chicago. And what did it do? 3,000 affordable housing units were retrofitted and 1,000 jobs were created. With what we're doing, we have 6 more of these in the pipeline, and we are anticipating in 2013 another 2,000 construction jobs. That's the kind of action plan that, as the mayor is talking about in terms of looking at what he's doing and what they're doing in Chicago, what we as the AFL-CIO are doing is we're trying to figure out how to use our assets to try to create jobs, to try to create infrastructure, to try to shore up communities. So that's what I'm doing here.
Let me say, look, I want to associate myself with what Randi said because, first of all, we created an infrastructure trust, and labor is an investor in it. We're going to do $200 million of retrofitting our public facilities, putting 1,200 people to work, LED lighting for all street lights, traffic lights, buildings' windows are going to be upgraded, HVAC systems, and the energy savings will be the financing vehicle to put the people to work. And labor is an investor in that infrastructure bank, the first city to have one here in the city of Chicago. Second is, and it's so true, If you create a vibrant economy, that's essential to the economic vitality of our schools, and it's a self-fulfilling circle and a self-fulfilling investment, because the two things we have to do as a country to compete and win, and we can, invest in our physical infrastructure and invest in our human capital. And if we make those two investments, nothing will hold this city, nothing will hold this country back. And that's what we're trying to do now.
Exactly right.
Let me ask you about public-private partnerships, because it's always struck me that in the United States, we do infrastructure in a much more socialist manner than in any other country in the world. You go to Europe, lots of it is privately financed, much of it is privately operated. You go to Asia, it's all often privately built. Yet here, the idea is you got to build it, you got to own it, it's all got to be part of a state bureaucracy. Why are we the least free market? Why aren't we, why don't we come up with more creative...
You want me to do this in 2 minutes or less?
Particularly, we're talking about parking meters.
Yeah. Fareed, you got to get in and out of this town alive.
Yeah, that infrastructure is not going to work for me.
That's all right. Let me say, it's interesting you say that. O'Hare, public-private partnership. One of my view, the best airport in America, only airport in all of North America that both major carriers operate out of. American and United pay the bonds in a cooperative relationship. It's a public-private partnership. Go visit one of the greatest aquariums, Shedd Aquarium, public-private partnership. Our whole museum campuses, public-private partnerships. So it's a natural, in my view, if done appropriately. What shouldn't be done, and here's where I think the mistake has been in the past, that somehow the partnership with private shrinks the public role. That's where it's wrong. There is a solid place for the public to set goals, own, make sure that the standards are maintained, and private capital can be a vehicle, which is what the bank is about, to help maintain public assets. What's wrong, selling or leasing the asset for X years, you don't own them anymore, and then they have control. It's private shrinking, right, collapsing the public role, which is essential for this partnership to work. And that has been the mistake in the past, is that the private replaced the public. The public is an equal partner, if not the majority partner, in that relationship. And O'Hare is a classic public-private partnership. It's a model, in my view, of what works when you do it right.
And let me just build on what the mayor said. There is a public responsibility for public assets. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a public accountability and a public transparency. But we can learn a lot from the private sector. And so take, for example, one of the things we're envisioning is how to broaden out this whole notion of infrastructure. Infrastructure is not just bricks and mortar. The mayor talked about other kinds of infrastructure, but infrastructure is not even simply energy retrofits. What we're thinking about in a place called McDowell County, and I think Gail Manchin, the former First Lady, is here somewhere. Gail, just wave so people can see you. We have a private-public partnership of about 100 businesses, community ventures, community groups, parents, labor unions, to do the revitalization of McDowell County. Now, why would the teachers union be involved in this? So if you take a place like McDowell, it's coal country, Appalachia, one point a booming county when coal was being mined. Now it isn't. 70% of our kids in public schools have parents that are not working, 70%. The highest OxyContin addiction rate in the country. 10 years of state control of education, people worked really hard, but couldn't figure out how to move this. So what we're doing is together, working in a very innovative, a very entrepreneurial way. The union was asked to be the head of this private-public partnership, and what we're doing is looking at everything, from how to create sewer lines to how to broadband. You do not have broadband in the county. So if the high school attempts to use its security system, everybody is off the computers for every other reason. To creating teacher housing, because how do we recruit and retain the best and the brightest if people have no place to live? To ensuring that kids have books at home. This is the kind of potential of a private-public partnership on looking at infrastructure as a way to revitalize community, not simply as bricks and mortar.
We're going to have to wrap, but I want to give people a sense of the need that would be met by this kind of infrastructure. So Rahm, if you can tell people that statistic you told me in the green room for your water modernization project.
I make all the commissioners write weekly reports so I can keep monitoring, make sure we're on task to accomplishing our goal. As I said, we're on the largest water infrastructure investment in the country is happening here in the city of Chicago. So we have a lottery for this. We're opening up 75 new jobs for laborers to do the work on water work and, when you tear up a street, lay the pipe, measure it, that whole work. 75 to start. And they said that, and I thought it was a typo. I wrote back to the committee, I said, this has to be wrong. 10,000 people applied for 75 jobs. Now, I want you to understand, and to the laborers' credit, when we announced all our infrastructure, they just came back with a series of work rule reforms that are going to save the city for new hires, like these 75s that we hire, $30 million in the next 6 years with work rule reforms, all that we can tangibly touch. So these are different type of pay scales than people working today, so a lot of reforms. 10,000 people applied for 75 jobs. Now we're going to put through airport, roads, water, mass transit, parks, city colleges, as well as our public schools, 30,000 people to work in just the next 3 years. I could clearly, if I could find the capacity, and I'm at a limit, put 50,000 people to work. And they all have to live in the city of Chicago. 10,000 people applied for 75 jobs. I wrote back to Tom, I said, this has to be a mistake. And these are, they got to have, laborers don't just think they're waving a flag here. They have to have math skills, a couple other things. There's a lot of technical capacity that goes in. So carpenters in the city of Chicago, they got a third unemployment. Third of their membership is unemployed. Okay, part of the retrofit is going to be electrical workers, IBEW, putting stuff in. So that's just give you a sense of the workers waiting to rebuild a 21st century economy.
People want to work.
Yes.
And what we're seeing, whether it's the mayor's infrastructure initiative in Chicago or everything else that we're doing around the country, is that when labor and business start working together on trying to put people back to work, to good jobs, when we start building the economy again, when we start building things again, it creates huge hope around the country.
Can I do one thing? In the 50s and 60s, when we invested 4% of our GDP in infrastructure, we grew at 4%. Not exactly A equals B, but that's what happened. And when we scaled back to 2% of our GDP invested in infrastructure, our economy on average grew 2%. You cannot sustain a 21st century economy on a 20th century foundation. It is not in our own self-interest. We should put people to work today to build our capacity for the future.
Exactly.
All right, I hope that gave you some sense of the issues. Please thank our participants.